Hello, my name is Andrew Faber, and I am your host today as we look at games at CTW schools, specifically computer games. So, there are several games I would like to introduce to this school, and before I introduce it, I would like to share with you the standards that I looked for when choosing these games, and also give you a review of each one so that you can share your opinion. So the first standard that I would like to set right away when I'm choosing a game for a school environment is that it provides low dopamine. So low dopamine meaning that it is not going to be in a first-person format. It won't be where you're walking around as if you're that person. There will also not be high intense situations. So there's a lot of shooter games out there. Fortnite is a very popular one. Or Call of Duty, and these games put the students in situations that creates a high dopamine. High dopamine means that there's a higher chance of addiction, and especially in the middle-age group. I mean, the reason we look at things like smoking or alcohol or social media, pornography, all those things are related to creating a high dopamine effect, and so we want to be wary of this. As educators, as parents, we want to be aware that that can cause a problem, that can cause a permanent addiction if a student, if a child is tying that into the problems that they have at home or at school. So to prevent that from happening, we're going to make sure that the games that I am picking out have a low dopamine effect on people. We also want the game to have a high critical thinking level so that students can use critical thinking skills and creative thinking skills to be able to accomplish what they're supposed to do in the game. There are some games that are high critical thinking, low creative thinking. So for example, there are many puzzle games out there that have one path to success. That's a high critical thinking game, but a low creative thinking game. There are also games that are flip-flopped the other way. So for example, a high creative thinking game and low critical thinking. What I want is it to be high on both sides. We also want to have academic value in the game. We are, after all, a school, and it would be great if we could hit two birds with one stone by having something engaging, exciting, critical thinking, creative thinking, and also having some academic value. So the games that I've chosen will tie to one of the core subjects in some way: math, English, science, or social studies, or even tying into other academic subjects such as engineering or things like that. I also want each game to have a certain developmental strategy. And what I mean by that is it would be great to have the game start off simple enough that a student would be able to understand what they're supposed to do without a lot of help, while at the same time, as the game goes on, the development of the strategy continues to increase, creating in them the ability to do something at the end of the game, something incredibly complex, something that requires extremely high critical thinking and extremely high creative thinking without starting them off on that need to know what that complexity is. And last but not least, I want every game to be safe and appropriate. If by safe, I am talking about if there's a multiplayer part to the game, that there is a safe either community surrounding the game, or that the developers created some safe bounds so that we don't have to worry about things like that happening in as far as talking to strangers or things like that into the game. I also want it to be appropriate, as in not violent, not some inappropriate kind of story line. So that is what I'm talking about when I talk about safe and appropriate. So with that in mind, let's jump in and take a look at some of these games. Okay, so the first game we're going to look at is Beltmatic. Beltmatic is a very straightforward game. You're basically creating, the simplest way I can describe it is you're creating a supply chain of numbers, and you're doing it in ways where you're manipulating math. So the first one, the first example is very simple, but then the next example, we have a new tool where we're going to get to add things. So then if I add 1 plus 1, I'll get 2. And so on and so forth. The best way to describe this is a supply chain of numbers. It gets incredibly complicated, and as I explain the different standards that are met with this game, I will load up a more complex game for you to sort of see. Dopamine level, we won't go into detail with every single game, but basically the way I view, or the way I see it with dopamine level is 2 things. I check to see how addicting the game is to me personally, and also based off of research, how high energy or high adrenaline rushing it is. And so with most of these games, the dopamine level is low because there's not a lot of intense action going on. You're slowly and methodically building supply chains in this game to get to your base. As far as the analytical part of this game goes, you can tell it's already very critical thinking. You have to, at some point, use adders, multipliers, dividers, subtractors to bring numbers, weird numbers, such as this one, to a point. The creative aspect is also really great because this endless world allows students to come up with different methods of solving the problems that they're trying to get. So the creative part is very strong. And as you can tell from this late game versus the early game, this has taken me about 3 hours to work on. The developmental strategy is extreme. At the very beginning, it's very simple, but then they slowly get to a point where they have to not only come up with this number here, but in the upgrades, they also have to keep a supply of these numbers also coming in. So, very high developmental strategy. As far as academic value goes, very straightforward. It's a math game. Up and up. You could also consider it a supply chain game in its simplest form because you need, for example, what's a good example right here? I need a supply of 30s as well as 2s to multiply and get 60, and then multiplying them again to get 120. So you could argue that it's a very basic supply chain or an introduction to supply chains to students. It's safe because it's not multiplayer. It's appropriate because only numbers are involved. Beltmatic. Okay, this game is called Master Plan Tycoon, and it is a game that can be at best be described as a supply chain slash programming, ultimately. I don't know how many of you know this, but a lot of programming actually happens in this format now, where you have blocks, and then you send commands to other blocks by connecting them with lines like this. So this supply chain game, you're trying to establish things. This is a fishery, so you have to be next to water. And you're trying to create a supply chain so that eventually you can expand across this whole island and unlock different things as you go along. But you have to keep sort of upgrading your supply chains as you go along. So this is what I'm talking about, where you would connect an output to an input. In this case, we're going to take the output of fish and we're going to put it into our storage. The supply chain that I'm talking about kind of looks like this. So we'd have a lumber camp that would go next to our trees. And then the next thing we would build is a sawmill where we would take the lumber from the lumber camp and we would move it to the sawmill. And then the sawmill would produce planks from the lumber, and then we could stick it into our storage. So this is kind of what the game looks like. Dopamine level remains low because it's a very low energy game. It takes a lot of methodical thinking to process what your next move might be or where you're going to place your pieces. As far as analysis goes, there is a fairly high analysis as far as deciding what you need to get to the next level. You can sit here and make a ton of lumber camps and sawmills, but that's not going to do what you need to do to move on to the next level. So critical thinking is essential. The creativity is also going to be important because You might decide you are going to be more efficient by moving something over in a certain way. They can't touch the lines, of course, so then you're using your creativity to sort of create a design that will kind of work well for you and your supply chains. And as far as developmental strategy goes, well, this game scales very, very well. You can kind of see, if I go back to the build menu, that we've got tier 0 buildings, and then they go all the way up to something like tier 6, tier 7, and so on. And we have, we get a lot of developmental strategy that happens in this game. As far as the academic value in it, supply chain games are very, very academically dense, intense, because they teach kids that things that we're trying to make. For example, I think later in this game you end up making chairs, but you need iron so that you can make nails, and you need trees so you can make planks, and it gets pretty in detail. And so this academic value to a game like this is very significant, especially in social studies and seeing what real life supply chains look like. It's a very safe game because there is no multiplayer to the game, and it's very appropriate as there is no graphics other than these. So Master Plan Tycoon, very good choice. Terra Nil, the next game that we're going to look at, is a game that is kind of the opposite of the games that I talked about before. Instead of creating supply chains and building up complexity, our goal is to not create a supply chain, but in fact restore a barren wasteland. And so students will use different things at their disposal here, and as they continue to greenify the map, we'll even get more tools so that they can restore this wasteland. And so I'm going to jump actually right down to the value, the academic value of a game like this, which I believe is biological. It not only creates a sort of environmental awareness kind of game, but it also teaches children about ecosystems and about what is necessary to having a thriving ecosystem. Because as this game builds in complexity, they're even having to, not only right now, in this current gameplay, what we're doing is mostly just laying down groundwork for plants. But then later on, we'll actually be doing more than just that. We'll be doing, creating ecosystems for animals as well. I'm not afraid to say, too, that this is also a game that is quite beautiful, and it's a very relaxing game to play during stressful times, perhaps. That brings me to the dopamine thing, which is very low, because once again, you are being kind of methodical in the decisions you make. If I were to make a bunch of silly decisions, each of these things cost leaves. And so if I'm putting down a bunch of windmills, I'm losing leaves up here. And if I don't make the right choices, I might lose all the leaves and I'm stuck at ground one. So this game does require a very methodical approach and is not high energy. So then that means dopamine levels are low. As far as the critical thinking in this game is high. It's not as high as the other ones because, as you can probably see here with the different numbers, there is not a huge amount of stress on where I need to place things. For example, I can make a kind of silly decision here, and I'm not going to be penalized the way that I might in another one of the games that I've played before. However, this game is very creative as far as choosing places where you're going to put your things, and ultimately finding a way to even get rid of these objects once you've normalized the ecosystem. As far as developmental strategy goes, I have seen a bit of a slower developmental strategy in this game compared to others. It still gets more complicated. This is, I believe, a forest biome, and at some point we make tropical biomes and Arctic biomes, just a sort of wide variety. But the complexity doesn't increase as exponentially as the other two games have in the past. But that being said, it still does offer incremental strategies, and the students will not quickly be bored of a game like this. Safe and appropriate, of course, it is safe because it's also a single-player game, no multiplayer element to it. It is appropriate as well because in spite of the fact that we'll have an ecosystem of animals where sometimes you have to put the wolves next to the deer because they need to hunt for food, they don't actually portray wolves hunting and eating deer, so everything stays kind of like you're seeing now, a very beautiful element type game without creating unneeded violence. And I really appreciate the developers for doing that. So this is Terra Nil. All right, our next game is Terra Escape, and right away you can see here that there is a multiplayer element to this game. That means that safety for parents could be called into question, but I will say that the developers have done a good job of controlling that. They have a report function, so then that makes the community very calm and they're not inappropriate. Most people are there for the intellect of the game, and so I just wanted to start off by bringing that up. This game is kind of a similar aspect to Terra Nil, the way it is played, in the fact that you have to put down things to earn points so that you can continue putting down things. So in that sense, it's kind of one of those games. This one's a little bit more harsh on the students, which means the critical thinking is going to be much higher. But it does require students to think carefully about where they're going to put things. So this is their keep, and we're going to choose something to upgrade, and students will be able to go through that tree as we go along, and the further that they can upgrade, the better. So I'll just point out down here, we've got this. This is the points we need to get to the next level upgrade to our castle, and these are the number of points we need in order to get a new deck of cards where we can place things. So right now we're going to get some gathering huts, and we need 44 points, so we're going to look for places to put down our things, and you can see kind of where kids would be using strategy as well as just common sense to decide that, you know, it's probably not a good idea to put a food gatherer hut close to a city center where you don't have much except for maybe these animals that they would be gathering. It would be more important to maybe put it out here around bushes that are collecting food. And so they can make decisions like that, or even go to, I believe, lakes, rivers. Yeah, there you go, rivers offer a little bit of food as well. And so students are going to be making strategic decisions to decide where they are going to put things. And then you can see here, if you've been noticing, I got 2 decks of cards by getting quite a few points there, and I can move forward in the game. Again, this is not a very high dopamine game. It's a pretty low dopamine game. The only exception I'll say is that I have noticed when I'm playing this, it's calm and relaxing, but then you get to a place where you'll discover something like this. No, you'll discover some new trick, and that gives a little burst of adrenaline. I won't say it's a big deal, but depending on what your standards are, it might be a big deal to some of you. And with the graphics too, this is something then that is a little bit higher dopamine level, but still, in my opinion, something that is not an addiction, not something that you get easily addicted to. It's something that can easily be walked away from. As far as analysis goes, critical thinking is very, very strong as far as deciding things. You could argue that that the game kind of cheats for you, and I can just sort of wobble around until I find something that's a high number. But once I start playing around enough with it, what I've noticed when I'm doing it is that I start understanding what kind of graphics I'm looking for, what kind of items I'm looking for, and so then even though I might cheat in the beginning, in the end it actually becomes very straightforward for me, and I use my critical thinking very, very strongly in deciding where I'm going to place things. Creative thinking. Of course, this is a beautiful little world that you're going to develop your city, your empire on, and so the creative thinking is very strong here. And developmental strategy, you can see that as we move forward in the upgrades, they're going to keep unlocking more and more things, and as you unlock more and more things, that means that you have new decks of cards with new types of cards in it, so the complexity does grow exponentially as well. As far as academic value goes, this sort of gives students a chance to kind of see where, for example, food comes from, or these are iron mines and stone mines, things that we sometimes take for granted because we just get a finished product showing up at our grocery store or local store. But then they can kind of see that if you were going to run a self-sustaining city, that you kind of have to spread things out, because trees are going to provide lumber, stone is going to be from the mountains, and to create something sustainable, you have to make sure you're not overdoing one place. So I feel like that academic value is very, very important. And then as far as points go, simple math, if you're trying to get the highest score, simple math is going to be taking a very big role in this game as well. As far as appropriate goes, I've seen no graphics, even when you set hunters down for the deer, no graphics that are inappropriate at all. I feel this game is gorgeous, and that's it. Nothing inappropriate, and really a wonderful game to play. Okay. This is Kingdoms Reborn. This is a fantastic game. It is one of my personal favorites. I've had to re-record this several times because it is one of my favorites, and I like to talk a lot about it, but I want to keep it simple and succinct so that you can make an informed decision. So right away, multiplayer aspect. The multiplayer aspect is quite safe because here you can see how many games are currently available. None. So that, if you're not a game expert, that tells you that there are not a lot of people jumping on this game trying to play with strangers, and that will be the case for most of the time with our students. They'll be playing with each other or playing on their own. So I'm going to go ahead and load up a game that I already prepared so that I don't have to try and think about what I'm doing in the game as well as describing it to you. This game is a city builder, and the main things you're providing right at the beginning of the game is you've got these people, you've got this little village that is sort of in the middle of a post-apocalypse world. I think the storyline is something like the world is done freezing and now we're going to recreate civilization. And so 3 things that you have to provide for your people right away is going to be housing, heat, and food. So those are things that your people need to survive. If you don't provide that, then they die. And so this is the basic premise, except it gets more complicated. It starts with just food and heat and housing, but then you need medicine in order to survive. You need tools to be more efficient, and then they're going to start demanding luxury goods as well. And so this game does scale quite well, and it starts off very simple, like even now I'm not really describing it. This is a card kind of based game, which means when I click on this card, I've got only 5 choices, and that makes it very, very simple, especially for students who might get overwhelmed with the choices that they have to make. They might decide, okay, charcoal burner creates coal, which is a heating thing. Hunting lodge is a food thing and also creates leather, so that's something that will be useful. A forester creates wood, where you can plant trees and cut them down. So instead of getting overwhelmed with 100 different choices, they're started with very limited choices that they can easily manage, and then as they advance in the game, they'll be able to make more decisions as things get more complicated. The critical thinking in this game is very, very high. Because you are constantly trying to evaluate. You've got these graphs here too that I don't have because it's too early in the year, but you've got graphs that are showing production and consumption. So then you can evaluate what you need, because I'm consuming this much food, but I'm not producing this much food. And so students will be using a lot of critical thinking in that. The creative thinking, of course, is also going to be a huge element. I play this game with my whole family, my parents and my brothers and sister, and each person develops their city in a different way. I tend to build a kind of grid-like structure when I'm building, and I've got a sister who likes to build in more of a beautiful way. So she'll build more organically, sort of deciding that she wants her houses to kind of go follow the landscape of the mountains, for example, or she doesn't want them right next to each other, so it gives them a little space. And the thing is that her system and my system both work. So the creative element in this game is very, very high, and I really appreciate that. And you also can name your town as well, your village. So I mean, those are small little things, but that also builds your creative thinking. As far as developmental strategy goes, very, very high developmental strategy. I told you already that we start in the Dark Age, and as you go along, you move along into the later ages, and each one of these sort of blocks is a new building or group of buildings that can be unlocked. And while you're starting off, collecting food from a pig ranch, you might eventually get to a place where you're cultivating wheat and making bread, or something even more complex. So the developmental strategy is very high. As far as academic value goes, I would say it has a couple of elements to it. The first is the mathematical value, which is you're constantly checking your production and consumption. Eventually, over the years, they'll even show you graphs that students can watch and follow to make sure that they're following they're taking care of their people. They also will be having a lot of supply chains in this game. So they'll start off with basic resources that get refined into nicer ones, that get refined into nicer ones than that. And so that's a very important social studies element in academic value in this game. And I would say also city placement. They're going to learn very quickly why cities or towns tend to be built next to fresh water. And they can also build a city in a desert and see how it's possible. So the beginning game, for example, most likely they'll build next to rivers or next to the sea. But eventually they might get to a place where they would try and build in the desert, and they would see the difficulties of having a city in the desert, but also the ways around being able to survive in the desert, to build a city in the desert in places such as Dubai or Las Vegas, how they're able to do something like that. They'll be able to realize that in this game. Safety, we already talked about. Appropriate, I would say that this game has a little bit of some elements that some people might question. So for example, we have these luxury tiers that help people become wealthier and upgrade. And some of these luxury tiers, such as beer or sake or cannabis, could be a questionable thing to have in a game for some parents. I will say that there is no storyline that suggests anything with those elements, so it's not like Bill drank a beer and then became drunk on the street or anything like that. None of that stuff comes into play. All the students realize is it's a name, and if I provide this luxury item to my homes, then I can upgrade the housing and the people so that they can produce more money and more science. So that's kind of how that works. The other thing that I had noticed in this game, but it only happens if you don't feed your people, so it might come up here because I have no food, is they will ask this user if they want to resort to cannibalism. And so that's another element that I find to be questionable appropriateness. It doesn't really happen if you actually feed your people, but still it's something to consider. Again, all it really does is just provide an extra amount of food for them for that beginning if they have people that are starving, and then they don't really revisit the conversation of cannibalism or anything like that. It's an interesting element. It's not something I feel like they delve into too deeply that I would keep it off the list of games to review, but it's something that I would definitely want to make sure parents are aware that it is something that is mentioned. So this is Kingdoms Reborn, a fantastic game. Highly, highly recommend it. I highly recommend it for parents even because, like I said, we have several generations in my family who really enjoy this game, and it can be a fun family game as well as a learning game at school. All right, this is Townscaper, and this game is pretty simple. The whole point of it is you've got this sort of open world where you can left click to insert things or right click to delete them. And basically the whole point of it, as you might be able to tell from its name, Townscaper, you're going to be creating a town from it. So if I click on something that's already built, then it creates a building. If I put two things together, it creates a long building, and if I put things on top, then it creates even more. And there's many different varieties. You can not make a long house, but a big house like that, maybe one with a chimney on top, something like that, or a second story that looks interesting like that. You can even build a very, very, very tall tower. So this is basically it. The dopamine level is low because there's not a lot going on in the game. This is a low critical thinking game unless you establish some kind of boundary. So when I sort of tested this out on a student, I asked them to create 4 districts in a town and to explain what each district did. And they had to separate each district by a different color. So then that way it could be easy to see what was the resident district or the industrial district or whatever. And so the student had a lot of fun sort of expanding their town because you can expand it quite a bit, and just having a fun time with that. The creative thinking part of this game is very, very high because it is pretty much a paintbrush, except this time you're using you're creating towns and buildings instead of colors. Paint strokes. The developmental strategy, there's not much to it. So it's left click to build something, it's right click to delete something. So there's not a lot as far as the strategy goes. It sort of ties to that critical thinking. If we use this kind of game in school, I would want it to be used where the teacher is setting up a sort of target for them to accomplish. So whether it's building a 4-district city or it's building trying to copy, like building the Hagia Sophia or the Eiffel Tower or something like that, that would be something that I would sort of want to see being used at school. But as far as something to be used at home, this is a very relaxing game, not something that is very addictive, so not very high dopamine. And the academic value to it is very simple artistic. It's all about building and making something beautiful. I wouldn't say that the engineering aspect is particularly accurate. If I wanted to keep going with this kind of thing where I'm deleting as I go along, they're going to create some kind of structure that is unrealistic. So I would say that the only thing that really this game has to offer as far as academic value is the artistic value. So this is Townscaper, very safe. It's not a multiplayer game, and it's appropriate because there is no storyline. There is nothing else except for the graphics that I'm showing you right now, and that's all. This is Townscaper. Okay, so we've taken a look at these games. I hope that you have seen the value in them. Please let me know if there's a particular game that does not look like something that would be appropriate in your eyes. I want to know feedback. If you feel like there's other games that are out there that would be very useful, please, I love suggestions. I feel like these games are going to be great ways in making learning continue to be exciting, especially in the 21st century. I feel like board games and computer games are great ways when used the right way, when balanced, when checking the critical thinking skill set that's required to accomplish them. I feel like they can be great tools to create a high critical thinker in a child because these are engaging while at the same time learning. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.